Welcome to another special episode of Project 250. This one we're calling Remember the Ladies, a reference to Abigail Adams, who encouraged her husband John and his congressional colleagues not to neglect the fairer sex when establishing their new republic. In the same spirit of justice and fairness, we have chosen to heed Abigail's call by presenting a series of brief biographical sketches of 10 remarkable revolutionary women that you may not be familiar with, but should be. Please note that this is not a countdown video, and we're not ranking these women. We're here to recognize them and acknowledge their contributions to the patriot cause. With that in mind, the women will be presented in alphabetical order, starting with Abigail Adams. Even though we're not ranking anybody, it seems fitting that Abigail Adams should come first in this video, since her words inspired the creation of this list. It was simply a coincidence that her name came first alphabetically. To get into specifics, Abigail Adams was born Abigail Smith in November 1744 in Weymouth, Massachusetts. She was the second daughter of William and Elizabeth, née Quincy, Adams. On October 25, 1764, she married John Adams, who was 9 years her senior, at her home in Weymouth. Her clergyman father, William Smith, officiated at the ceremony. Together, the couple had 6 children, 4 of whom lived to adulthood: Nabby, John Quincy, Charles, and Thomas. Along with Barbara Bush, Abigail Adams is one of only 2 women to be both the wife and mother of a U.S. president. She was also the First Lady to reside in the White House, then called the President's House. By any objective measure, Abigail was a remarkable woman, if for no other reason than the fact that she remained married to John Adams for 54 years, quite an accomplishment when you think about it. Few women of any era were as capable and intelligent. Abigail Adams was an early advocate for women's rights, and she urged her husband John and his congressional colleagues that the revolution represented an opportunity to improve the legal status of women. In a time when women typically did not participate in public affairs, Abigail took an active role in both political and business matters. While John Adams was away in Philadelphia at the Continental Congress, Abigail ran the family farm at Braintree and raised their 4 children by herself. Although Abigail never experienced actual combat, she was a woman of great personal courage. She watched the Battle of Bunker Hill from her home in Braintree with her children. Abigail directly served the patriot cause when, in 1775, she was appointed by the Massachusetts General Court to a 3-member committee tasked with investigating women suspected of being Tories. Abigail was very politically savvy. In fact, John often sought her advice throughout his career, even during his presidency. As First Lady, Abigail actively engaged in government affairs and was well informed on the issues. Political opponents sometimes derisively referred to her as Mrs. President. Nevertheless, Abigail retained a high degree of popularity with the public, a trend that continues to the present day. In fact, Abigail consistently ranks among the top 3 most admired First Ladies. Next up is Margaret Catherine Kate Barry. This one was a bit of a conundrum. In researching this project, I discovered that she was referred to by several different names, and it seemed like no 2 sources called her by the same name. This confusion over names made it difficult to know if I was dealing with a single individual, and may explain why Kate Barry is not well remembered today, which is unfortunate, as her story is certainly worth remembering. She was born Margaret Catherine Moore on November 29, 1752, in County Antrim, Ireland, the eldest of 10 children born to Charles and Mary Moore. In 1763, Kate's family emigrated to America after King George III granted Charles Moore a parcel of land in Spartanburg County, South Carolina. That initial grant of land eventually grew into the 3,600-acre Walnut Grove plantation. The Moore family owned about a dozen slaves. In 1767, at age 15, Kate Moore married Andrew Barry. The couple resided at Walnut Grove and had 11 children together. A skilled horsewoman, Kate served as a volunteer scout for General Daniel Morgan during the Cowpens campaign. Her knowledge of the local roads and trails. Walnut Grove Plantation was about 30 miles from the Cowpens battlefield, combined with her superb equestrian skills made her an ideal choice for this mission. General Morgan, upon learning that British General Lord Cornwallis was advancing with a combined force of about 1,000 redcoats and loyalists, realized that his own force of about 600 men was insufficient and called on Kate to recruit volunteers from the Carolina backcountry. Kate successfully rounded up about 1,000 new recruits, primarily local militia, including her husband, Captain Andrew Barry, and her brother, Thomas Moore, along with a few veterans and South Carolina Rangers, boosting Morgan's strength to about 1,600 men. On the day of the battle, January 17, 1781, Kate rode to warn her neighbors of the approaching British forces. Thanks in large part to her recruitment efforts and the courage of her husband and brother, both of whom fought bravely, the Battle of Cowpens was a decisive American victory. However, Kate's service and sacrifice did not end there. Later in the war, she was captured by a band of local Tories and interrogated. When she refused to disclose the location of her husband's militia unit, she was tied to a tree and whipped. In recognition of her contributions to the American victory, Margaret Catherine Kate Barry was honored with the title the Heroine of the Cowpens. Margaret Cochran Corbin. Margaret Cochran Corbin falls within the category known as camp followers, women who followed their husbands on campaign and performed various domestic chores. However, Margaret's service to the cause went well beyond laundry and cooking and included actual military service. Born on November 12, 1751, in present-day Franklin County, Pennsylvania, Margaret lost her parents during an Indian raid in 1756 when she was 5 years old. Her father was killed outright while her mother was abducted and never heard from again. Margaret and her brother John were not at home and so escaped the attack. Margaret was then sent to live with an uncle until she reached adulthood. In 1772, at age 21, Margaret married John Corbin, a farmer from Virginia. Early in the Revolutionary War, John Corbin joined the 1st Company of Pennsylvania and was assigned to a gun crew. Margaret accompanied him on campaign where, along with other wives, she performed domestic chores and cared for the wounded. She earned the nickname Molly Pitcher for her role in carrying water for both drinking and cooling overheated cannons. In November 1776, John's artillery company was part of a 2,800-man garrison left at Fort Washington in northern Manhattan to cover the retreat of Washington's army to White Plains, New York. On November 16th, Fort Washington was attacked by 8,000 British and Hessian troops. Margaret, as a volunteer nurse, was permitted to stay with John. In the course of the battle, John, who was in charge of one of 2 artillery pieces deployed by the Americans, was killed by enemy fire. Margaret immediately stepped in and took charge of the gun and continued firing until she was wounded. During the battle, Margaret suffered severe injuries, including a mangled jaw. Eventually, Fort Washington fell, and Corbin's company was forced to surrender. Fortunately for Margaret, she was recognized as a legitimate combatant by the British and released on parole. Despite her injuries, Margaret went to Philadelphia, where the Executive Council of Pennsylvania awarded her $30 to meet current expenses and referred her case to the Board of War. In July 1779, the Board of War granted Margaret half-monthly pay along with a new set of clothes, or its cash equivalent. Corbin remained listed on military rolls until the end of the war and was enrolled in the Corps of Invalids. In 1781, the Corps of Invalids was assigned to the garrison at West Point. She was discharged in 1783 and died in January 1800. Margaret, commonly known as Captain Molly for her bravery and quick thinking, never fully recovered from her wounds and permanently lost the use of her left arm. She was the first woman in American history to receive a pension for military service. Among the honors and memorials to her are the Margaret Cochran Corbin Award presented annually by the Daughters of the American Revolution to a woman serving in the military. In a final bizarre twist to the story, a 2017 archaeological study of remains at the Cemetery of the United States Military Academy at West Point, previously thought to be those of Margaret Corbin, determined that they actually belonged to an unknown male. The location of Margaret Corbin's final resting place remains unknown. Molly Pitcher. The name Molly Pitcher presents some unique challenges. Traditionally associated with Mary Ludwig Hayes, the subject of this profile, the name has also been linked to several other women, including Margaret Cochran Corbin. Some have suggested that Molly Pitcher may not refer to a specific individual, but was a generalized nickname for any woman who served in the Revolutionary War, much like World War II's Rosie the Riveter. Nevertheless, the term has been most commonly applied to Hayes. Mary Ludwig Hayes, much like Margaret Corbin, was known as a camp follower. And like Margaret Corbin, Mary Hayes found herself thrust beyond the traditional roles assigned to camp followers and right into the thick of the fighting. For Mary, the moment of truth came at the June 28, 1778, Battle of Monmouth, New Jersey. When her husband, William, fell wounded, Molly stepped in and helped work his artillery piece. Mary's story began in 1754 when she was born in Trenton, New Jersey, to Maria Margaretha and Johann George Ludwig. The exact date of Mary's birth is in dispute, but may be October 13th. In addition to her parents, Mary had an older brother, Johann Martin. In early 1777, she married William Hayes, a barber from Carlisle, Pennsylvania. That same year, William enlisted in Proctor's 4th Pennsylvania Artillery. During the winter of 1777, Mary Hayes joined William at the encampment at Valley Forge. She joined a group of women, led by Martha Washington, who did laundry and tended to the sick and dying. Sometimes, Mary and other camp followers were called upon to carry water to the troops on the drill field. In addition to quenching the soldiers' thirst, the water was used by the artillery to soak the sponges used to clean sparks and gunpowder out of the barrel. This was probably the origin of the nickname. The soldiers would shout, "Molly, Pitcher," when they needed fresh water. During the Battle of Monmouth, Mary Hayes spent much of the day fetching water from a nearby spring. June 28, 1778, being an unusually hot day, Mary was kept extremely busy hauling water for the troops and artillery. At some point during the battle, William Hayes collapsed from either wounds or heat exhaustion. Although it's often been reported that William was killed, he actually survived. When William was carried off the battlefield, Mary took his place at the cannon and continued to work it using her husband's ramrod. At one point, a British musket ball or cannonball, no one seems certain which it was, flew between her legs and tore off the bottom of her skirt. She supposedly said something to the effect of, "Well, that could have been worse," and went back to work. After the battle, General Washington issued Mary a warrant as a non-commissioned officer. She became known as Sergeant Molly, a nickname she retained for the rest of her life. After the war, Mary and William Hayes returned to Carlisle, where Mary gave birth to a son they named Johannes or perhaps John. William Hayes died in 1786. In 1793, Mary married John Macaulay, who absconded sometime between 1807 and 1810, after financially ruining her. After Macaulay left, Mary did odd jobs around Carlisle. In 1822, the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania awarded Mary Macaulay an annual pension of $40. Mary died in Carlisle on January 22, 1832, and was buried in the old graveyard in Carlisle under the name Molly Macaulay. A statue of Molly Pitcher stands in the cemetery. Esther DeBerdt Reed. Unlike Margaret Corbin and Molly Pitcher, Esther Reed never saw actual combat or even got near a battlefield, but she still made significant contributions to the Patriot cause through financial and other assistance to the welfare of the troops. In addition, she also served as First Lady of Pennsylvania from 1778 to 1780. Born in London on October 22, 1746, to Dennis and Martha Simon DeBerdt, Esther married American Joseph Reed in London on May 31, 1770. The couple later moved to Philadelphia along with Esther's widowed mother, Martha. Esther and John had 6 children together, of whom all but one survived to adulthood. Joseph pursued a successful legal career and served in the Continental Congress from 1777 to 1778. Esther supported his law practice by keeping records and helping with correspondence. In late September, the Reeds, along with the rest of Congress, fled Philadelphia to escape the British occupation of the capital. The following year, 1778, Esther became First Lady of Pennsylvania when Joseph was elected President of the Supreme Executive Council of Pennsylvania, a position analogous to that of governor. On June 12, 1780, Esther published a broadsheet called Sentiments of an American Woman, in which she argued that women were just as patriotic as men and called for financial sacrifices and increased public roles for women in the Revolution. To prove her point, Esther, along with Benjamin Franklin's daughter, Sarah Franklin Beach, established a charity organization known as the Ladies of Philadelphia, who went door to door soliciting donations in support of the troops. In total, the Ladies of Philadelphia raised about $300,000 for the troops, an enormous sum for the time. On June 20th, Esther's husband, Joseph, wrote to General Washington to inform him of the funds that had been raised. In the letter, Joseph expressed the hopes of Esther and the other committee members that the money be divided up and given directly to the soldiers to do with as they pleased. However, Washington rejected this plan, arguing that the men might squander the funds on alcohol or similar vices. Washington believed it would be more beneficial if the money was used to purchase clothing. After further correspondence, Washington convinced the ladies to use the funds to purchase linen and sew shirts for the troops. Altogether, the ladies made more than 2,000 shirts. Esther died of dysentery on September 18, 1780, just before her 34th birthday. After her death, she was recognized as a Daughter of Liberty for her efforts in support of the Revolution. She is buried with her husband, Joseph, in Philadelphia's Laurel Hill Cemetery. This concludes part 1 of our tribute to women of the Revolution. Make sure to tune in next week for part 2. In the meantime, feel free to share your thoughts in the comments below. If you'd like to learn more about these women, check out the description box below for information on resources for further reading. As always, make sure to like, share, and subscribe. And if you think of it, hit the notification bell as well. It all helps out the channel. Thanks for watching.